Alright, time for my thoughts and reflections on Chapter 10 of B.J. Penn's autobiographical Why I Fight. Chapter 10 is entitled Up Then Down, and these are my notes and reflections. If you haven't read the book, they could potentially spoil aspects of the book. But if you're not intending to read it, or if you already have and just want to compare notes or whatever, if it doesn't matter to you, go ahead and keep watching the video. I'm just laying this out for my own purposes as a kind of notes on the literature. I'm going to start going through a lot more of taking my notes on video instead of in written form. And so right now, one of the things I am interested in learning about is some of the developments that have occurred in the martial arts in the last 10 years, and certainly a lot of that has revolved around the explosion of intense competitive fighting in mixed martial arts. And so I'm reading B.J. Penn's autobiography. In Chapter 10, he's finishing off a 3-fight deal and going into a second contract with the UFC. Where we left off in Chapter 9, he had just been beat by Pulver. He was going for the lightweight belt, lightweight world championship belt. Against Pulver, and he got beat. And this was really the first time he'd been beat in the octagon or in mixed martial arts in general. And so it was a low point for him. Going into the Pulver fight, he hadn't seemed to get enough time to rest between his previous fight before that and the Pulver fight. Maybe even less than a month he had, and so after the Pulver fight, he took that rest that he needed. He went back to Hilo, Hawaii, and although he continued to train, constantly, he was also relaxing, and he was, he mentions that he's drinking every night with his buddies again and partying every night and this kind of thing. He was making sure to get in his training and, making sure to continue to stay in shape, but at the same time he was relaxing the way he wanted to relax before training for the Pulver fight. He needed some downtime, and that's natural. Things go in waves, and if you can't stay on the you can't stay on the top forever. You gotta ride a wave and then go back out and rise and fall a little bit before you take the next one that you're gonna ride. So anyway, he got out of sync with the natural flow, so he lost the Pulver fight, and he's back in Hawaii now. He's on the downside. It really bothers him that he lost the fight, a lot more than it would bother him if he lost a jiu-jitsu match. Losing the jiu-jitsu match, you just start strategizing again and learning what you need to do to overcome what that situation was. Losing a mixed martial arts fight, he has to ask himself harder questions like, was his heart really even in it? That kind of a thing. So being back in Hawaii, he's waiting to hear what his next match is going to be, the last one on his contract, and they end up setting him up to fight this Creighton. And so he, instead of going back to the mainland to train as he had been, he starts training. He starts setting up his own training regime in Hawaii with his brothers and with his group there. And he doesn't have any real scientific way of going about it. Really, MMA is so new and stuff, but he trains hard, and the fight day comes around, and he ends up beating Creighton pretty easily. And then the UFC signs him for another 3-fight contract, and this one's kind of like progressive. The way that it looks, he gets paid to fight, and then he gets paid to an equal amount if he wins. So I think his first fight is 15 and 15, and then 20 and 20, 25 and 25, and there is some suggestion in there that he was getting, and he and other fighters were getting duped by Dana White, and should have been getting paid more. Certainly Pulver, at this point, renegotiating his contract, thought he should get paid more, and he wasn't going to be, and so he decided to leave the UFC. And when he left the UFC, then that left the World Championship belt in limbo for the lightweight division. And so BJ Penn was not going to get his rematch with Pulver to try to win that title. Instead, what they decided to do was they were going to have a tournament with the top 3 contenders, or the top 4 contenders, to see who would get the belt. And so it was BJ, Kyle Luno, who BJ had beaten like 11 seconds before, Matt Serra, and I forget who was the 4th contender. Anyway, the first match that BJ was going to go in was going to be against Matt Serra, and Matt Serra is someone he hadn't fought before, but who is a well-known fighter, and particularly in the jiu-jitsu world, and it kind of got set up as an East versus West in jiu-jitsu, because Matt Serra was East Coast, New York, and BJ Penn represented the West, and they both had some pretty impressive credentials in terms of their jiu-jitsu backgrounds. So BJ starts training for Serra, and this time he figures, since Serra is so good in jiu-jitsu, not that he has anything to fear about going to the ground with Serra, but maybe he should train to keep things on the feet. And so he trains relentlessly to avoid takedowns. He also gets a boxing coach, an old boxer in Hawaii that's pretty renowned, and has him working on his boxing skills. And basically, this is his strategy to beat Serra. He's going to stay on his feet, and he's going to outbox him. And so, but again, in terms of his training, it's not very scientific. He mentions that the month before, the last 4 weeks or whatever, they designed this training schedule where he was sparring and stuff for one 5-minute round in 4 weeks out, and then in 3 weeks out he was doing 2 5-minute rounds, and then 2 and 1 weeks out he was doing the 3 5-minute rounds of sparring. And this was for some reason he thought this would be a good idea in his training to kind of build up, and then those last 2 weeks he'd be doing the same amount of time that he'd do in the ring itself. But upon reflection, he thought that was a stupid way to go, and he should have just been training at least the full 3 rounds the whole month, if not more than 3 rounds. But in any case, fight day comes along, and he's able to beat Matt Serra, and he's able to do it using the broader strategy, which is not to get taken down, and to to outbox him. And he does a really good job of this. Now mind, as I'm reading this chapter, every time he describes his fight and the fight is over, then I've been going on the the fight library on the UFC.com and watching the fight, so that I hear, I read what BJ has written about it or said about it, and then I go back and watch the fight myself and see it with my own eyes, which is really a cool thing, a cool new resource, in the technology, that we don't have to just read about it afterward, or try to find, try to hunt down some video or something somewhere, some actual physical videotape, but we can just go online and find the video archive somewhere and access it, like that. So as I'm reading through the book now, every time there's a fight, I get to watch the fight. So I get to see him beat Matt Serra. Then, of course, he's going to be going for, he's got through the first round of the tournament. They're having a tournament with the 4 contenders for the lightweight belt. Matt Serra was his first round, or his first part of the tournament, his first elimination, and then he's going to fight whoever of the other 2 won, and it happened to be Caol Uno. Caol Uno was the guy that he beat like nothing, like 11 seconds before, but he realizes that his overcoming Caol Uno like that, he really hadn't fought Caol Uno yet, and so he didn't know what to expect. He didn't know what Caol Uno's strategy had been, or whether it would be the same going into this next fight, and he didn't know how to plan, really. The fight was, I think, about 5 months out for UFC 41, and Penn against Uno, and during that time he went back to Hawaii and to train again. An interesting thing did happen after the after the Matt Serra match, which is that one of the guys from the American Kickboxing Association that he'd been training with in California, the guy that had been his cornerman, had brought a fighter to the UFC to meet with Dana White, or he was introducing a fighter to Dana White under the auspices of that this guy is going to be able to beat BJ Penn. And so Dana actually told BJ about this, and BJ confronted, I think the guy's name was Wells, and he admitted that, yeah, that's what he was up to. And so that kind of ended the professional relationship that BJ had with these guys in at the American Kickboxing Association, though they'd all be his friends. And this is the group that had, what's his name, Shamrock and all of them. And but this kind of sealed the deal that they weren't working with BJ anymore, and it made sense because he was back in Hawaii doing his own thing by that time. So they remain friends, but they're not going to be in his corner anymore for sure. So now he's got to look for somebody else, and in Hawaii, and he finds a guy. I think the guy's name is Valentino, and this is a guy who's done all kinds of different martial arts, and the guy agrees to be one of BJ's main coaches. In fact, when he comes on, BJ gets rid of the boxer that he had hired before, realizing that the guy with skills in a variety of martial arts is more well-rounded than the boxer for MMA training, and having a limited amount of resources to put toward this team. So so he gets Valentino. Turns out that Valentino had been approached previously by people who in Hawaii, in Hilo, who wanted to beat up BJ Penn, who had it out for him because he'd been in some street fights and stuff, and one guy got hurt, and in response to getting hurt, they were looking for guys to hurt BJ, and they had approached this Valentino, and they had actually assembled a little team. I think they had a guy from Israel, Krav Maga guy. They had a guy from Africa, and then they had a guy, from Malaysia or something, who was literally carrying a stick around Hilo, and they were hunting for BJ when he was gone, to California and all of this. And he had heard about that people were out for him, but he didn't know the extent of it. So, you know, this is the kind of stuff that's going on in the background. Anyway, he starts training for Kowloon with this new Valentino guy, and now he's training, you know, he's not using that same approach that he used with Matt Serra, where he's kind of building up. He's training intensely the whole time he's preparing for Kowloon. But one of the things that's bothering him, that he's recognizing, that he saw with his Serra fight, was that, you know, he's gassing out in the ring. It didn't make sense to him because in his training, you know, he trained as much, if not more, than anybody else, more intensely than anybody else, and you know, he could do his 5 rounds and more in the training for the belt fight, but when it comes to the ring, he gets gassed out, he gets tired. So he didn't understand what that's about. He does note that his diet was never any good, but he thinks that his training should be able to, his intensity of training should be able to override that. And anyway, he trains toward this fight with Kowloon, and goes in, and they fight, and they go the whole 5 rounds. And this is for the lightweight world championship, and they go the whole 5 rounds, and it ends up being a draw. When you watch the fight, and certainly, you know, in the eyes of the UFC owners and in BJ's perspective, you know, he won the fight. He definitely did better than Kowloon, but in the judges' eyes, it was a draw, and it wasn't decisive enough to say otherwise. And it was because the gas ran out. After about the 2nd round, BJ was tired and was not able to win the fight decisively. And so when it's called as a draw, then instead of, you know, scheduling something else, another fight, what the UFC decides to do is get rid of the lightweight, and they're just going to have the welterweight on up from there, from then on. No more lightweight division. And so this throws a real kink into BJ's plans, and so now, you know, now he's on the downside again, and another downside of the wave as we come out of chapter 10. So what do I learn from this chapter? Really what I'm seeing here is his struggle to figure out what's the best way to train for a fight. I mean, this is the period in his life where he's got control, he's got the reins of his training. You know, yeah, he has coaches and everything, but he has a lot more say in what his training's going to be and how to do it, and he's not sure how to do it. And he's not sure how to do it effectively, and he, you know, in some ways, he might not be studied enough to have ideas about, you know, how to work so he's got the right nutrition and what amount of intensity to train. There is some suggestion at one point in the chapter where he says, you know, that overtraining is a serious problem. And when I was watching Tough 19, I remember him giving his team some time off and stuff because he recognized that they were perhaps overtraining. I'm interested to see, as the story goes on, what he learns about how to do the most effective training, because, you know, can you go that intense all the time? No, that defies that natural ups and downs kind of a thing. You know, at the same time, he's doing something wrong. Even when he's taking breaks, he's doing something wrong, because you know, even when he's drinking and partying and stuff to kind of relax, and then getting intense in the month going up to his fight, it's not working to help him stop gassing out. And so, you know, this is the big issue. And I'm curious to see how he resolves the issue. Along with the training, of course, there's the emotional ups and downs, which he seems to be handling pretty well. But I know at some point he too is going to end up leaving the UFC, and I think it's probably going to be for reasons of searching out a particular fight, and the UFC not providing whatever challenges or what have you. But I don't know yet. We'll see when that part comes. Anyway, those are my thoughts, my reflections, my notes on this chapter, and basically a play-by-play of what I read, along with, that idea that I hope to see him learn and express something about the effective styles of training as we continue through his career. And I can see at this point in his early career is when he's running into that issue that he just really doesn't know how to do the most effective training, and it's causing him problems. And so that seems to be the big controversy right now, and how will he overcome that? That's my thoughts.